Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Kelly, Priscilla, James. Really appreciate being up here. I'm going to read my lecture and I'm going to tell you why, though, first. I'm going to rationalize it. People contact me all the time and they say, I really want to meet you. I want to meet you. And I'm like, that's a bad idea. I'll clearly disappoint you. Just stick with the books, stick with the text. And so I like to stick with the text. It's It'll present some ideas to you. The ideas will be up here on the screen. I'll only talk for about 4 hours, maybe. No, it'll take 45 minutes and then we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. And I think at that point we'll have some things to do. So here goes I want to jump right in with, this is really a report from the academic front. It's really a report from how this looks and sounds in the universities and colleges, which I think are really important cultural institutions. I think all of us probably in this room were at some point trained in those institutions. And even people who disagree with us send their kids to us. So I find that really interesting. And so I'm really concerned about essentially mainstreaming this into the academy. I'll talk a lot about that. And it's going to sound a bit nerdy, but I think it'll work. Here are what I call the 3 bars. These are the 3 bars that intellectuals can get over when they're thinking about anomalous phenomena, maybe that you can try as well. The first bar, I think most of us in this room are probably over already. The question is, do these anomalous experiences happen? I can assure you that most intellectuals and scientists answer the first in the negative. They simply don't believe it, and they come up with all kinds of easy explanations why, none of which work, but that's what they do. The second bar is, if these things happen, do they tell us something about the nature of consciousness or mind? In other words, do they tell us something about subjectivity? I think a lot of us are probably over that bar as well. The third bar is the one that most people do not get over. Can they tell us something about the nature of nature? That is, of space, time, and matter. And what I left off here, the relationship of these things to consciousness. And I think that's really where this stuff goes. And I'll explain why that is so problematic. I think the answer to all 3 questions is yes. I also think, let me lay my cards on the table, that this is so because there is no final distinction between what we call consciousness and cosmos. Consciousness is cosmic and the cosmos is conscious. I will not explain such outrageous statements. That would take days. I've tried to do something of that in the books, no doubt inadequately. Alas, it is always inadequate. It is never enough. It cannot be enough for reasons that I want to explain. I think there are good reasons why it's never enough, and I'll explain those in a minute. Allow me instead first to get at these 3 questions in a roundabout way. Allow me to tell you a story, the story of how I came to help host the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University. This is a piece that appeared in Rice Magazine the fall before the conference, so about a year ago now. Allow me also to be what I happen to be, an academic, a professor, a historian of religions, a nerd who loves books, strange words, and even stranger people. I do so not to be jargony or opaque or trendy. I do so to be precise and advance our conversation. I actually think that what we call the humanities possesses immense resources for this conversation. They are not perfect. They are not adequate either, but they are a very good beginning, especially in their acute historical forms of consciousness and their approach to knowledge as socially constructed. I'm going to explain both of those questions. They're really crucial, and I think it's why a lot of this stuff is not understood. What we have come to think in the humanities is that our modern sensibilities around pretty much everything, including the self, society, secularism, science, matter, and mind, are socially and historically constructed. They are not innocent, natural, or universal. Even the conditioned sensorium of the body and brain, what we experience to be true with our senses and thoughts, are in historical fact based on centuries of affirmation and denial, physical or threatened violence directed at precisely these same anomalous experiences, colonial, imperial, and racist projects, and elaborate technologies, both mental and material. Put bluntly, we are who we are because of what our ancestors did and did not do, because of who won and who lost. And yet reality is always punching holes in our historical and social constructions, in those ancestors who won. Much of this hole punching, moreover, displays fantastic correspondences between the human being and the larger environment, suggesting in the end that our divisions between the inside and the outside, between the subject and the object, and everything that this split produces in our minds are not finally so, not at least in any ultimate sense. This is the great secret that I wish to whisper to you this afternoon. Reality only appears to be divided into mind and matter, into consciousness and cosmos, because you experience it as so. You are the splitter of the real, and when you go, so does the split. It is temporary. I should add that I am not at all certain that we are up to this secret. Perhaps this is why it still remains a whisper. People are afraid. The secret, after all, implies their ending. That is the first and perhaps the most basic reason that no explanation of this conscious cosmos is ever adequate or can be adequate. We do not want to hear it. We actually cannot hear it as us. We cannot hear this great secret because these social constructions enacted over centuries and in multiple cultural zones were incredibly effective. They created the negotiations, bigotries, compromises, fears, and paradoxes that are us. They have been devastatingly myopic. This repression, after all, renders us basically inept, incapable of understanding, much less accepting, extremely common human experiences that violate our assumed splits between consciousness and cosmos, or between mind and matter. We think these events are impossible, but they are only impossible within our historically constructed frameworks. But most simply, our conclusions are a function of our exclusion. Okay? In other words, we think what is real because of all the things we've taken off the table. If you just put those things on the table, that's not reality anymore, and suddenly you can't explain what's on the table. I say this all the time to my colleagues who think they can explain everything. I say, of course you can explain everything. You just took everything off the table you can't explain. No, it's well, that's simple. I've never gotten laughs or claps for that. All right. In 2010, I published an intellectual history of a most abused word, the paranormal. The book was Authors of the Impossible. The philosophical associations and scientific nuances of the paranormal. It was, by the way, first coined in French in 1903 as the paranormal. These complexes were complex and subtle. The word signaled something entirely natural, but well beyond our present science, something supernatural, 2 words. The technical term paranormal, please note, did not come to be in the tabloids, but in some of the most elite intellectuals and academic locations on the planet. Institutions like Cambridge, Stanford, Harvard, Duke, Princeton, and the University of Virginia all spawned research programs where these phenomena were called any number of names. The word psychical actually was coined in 1875 by a British chemist and physicist by the name of Sir William Crookes. The term superhuman was used by Alfred Russel Wallace, who co-discovered the principles of natural selection with Charles Darwin. He used it in 1876. The word superhuman, or Übermenschlich, was used consistently by Friedrich Nietzsche from 1881 to 1889. The word supernormal was coined probably by the classicist Frederick Myers, trained at Cambridge, came into use in the 1880s. The word superhuman was used again by William James at Harvard extensively in his last published book in 1909, right before he died. And the word parapsychological was used by two University of Chicago botanists, both with PhDs in botany, by the way, J.B. and Louisa Ryan at Duke. They were drawing the word from an earlier German thinker named Max Dessoir, who coined it in the 1880s. So all of these words are actually, as I like to say to my colleagues, these are our words. These are technical terms. These are not things you just throw out there. And so we come to the late 20th century when a French writer like Aimé Michel will write of la pensée surhumaine, literally a kind of superhuman thinking. The newly invented words just kept coming and coming and coming. It was as if scientists and intellectuals wanted to name something that could not be named. The same continues today, and so here we are. I have tried my own hand at this. By an author of the impossible, I mean an author who writes about common human experiences that are not supposed to happen but do anyway, and who, by writing and theorizing about these impossible things, renders them newly plausible, imaginable, thinkable, in a word, real. I mean an author who makes the impossible possible. And the easiest explanation I can give of this is just, it's an analogy. In the early 1700s, if you were living in France and you were talking to an urban intellectual, he, and it was always a he, would tell you how stupid the peasants and farmers were in the countryside for believing that rocks fall from the sky. Okay? Rocks don't fall from the sky. That's stupid, as they would say. But of course, the peasants and the farmers were just reporting their experiences, and it turns out rocks do fall from the sky. But what you need is a new model of the universe that could make what was impossible possible. And so that's what I mean by this phrase, the impossible. What we need is a theory. We don't need more data, folks. We've got plenty of data. We got more data than we can possibly talk about. What we need is a model to put it into some kind of framework that people can say, oh, of course that happens. Of course rocks fall from the sky. That's what we need.